absentee. I don't think there's any question.
I would say, you're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening, because we have as our guest State Senator Matt Murphy. This is a man on the go. 42, would you say?
You got it.
Right, 42.
Just earlier this week, or this month.
Yeah. So he's 42 years old. He has already been, what is this, your 5th year as state senator?
This is year number 6.
You're starting your 6th year. 6 years as his 6th year as state senator. He has run for lieutenant governor in a close race in the Republican primary. He almost got that nomination. He was running with Andy McKenna, who is now, a lot of folks wouldn't know this, but Andy McKenna is now chairman of the Illinois Policy Institute. Did you know that?
I did.
There you go. So I'm the last to know these things. Well, they don't want to tell me because I have my enemies. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that people are out to get me. You realize
or that they're not.
Or that they could be.
You know.
But very seriously, don't turn that dial, because we're talking here about pensions, and it's not boring. It's really juicy, sexy stuff. If we do pension reform, and I shouldn't say we, if those guys do it, I'm objective. I'm a journalist. I'm not a cheerleader for anything. Everybody knows that. So, but if the guys down in Springfield and the ladies do pension reform, what they can do by doing that is they can have a lot of effect on things, spending that other people want, or taxes being returned. So taxes cut. You could have increased spending on people who are very needy in medical services, other human services, or education. So there's a lot to be done, or you can continue to have substantial spending, sort of choke government spending on pensions. That's one. Very quickly, Medicaid, we're going to talk about that reform, talk about education reform, the whole budget process. It sounds like dry stuff, but it's exciting because we got Matt Murphy here. Matt, so the thing of it is here, you've been here, you're in your 6th year. People say, oh, the pensions are $80 billion underfunded. Maybe sometimes they say $100 billion, sometimes they say 110. It depends a little bit on inflation and who's president. No, I don't know what it is, but you do hear these wild ranges. But the point is, if it's $80 billion underfunded, if it's 110 billion underfunded, it doesn't matter. It means that there's a problem.
There's no question there's a problem. And I mean, to put that in context, I think the most recent number for the 5 state-administered pension systems is $83 billion.
That's total of 83.
Yeah, and our budget this year is $33 billion. So
2.5 times our total.
Right.
When you say your budget, though, you are excluding things. Sometimes people say the budget is about $55 billion, right?
That's true. Yeah, if you take in everything that's going to funnel through Illinois, Illinois government, it'll be in that range.
So that includes federal funding that comes through. Does it mean that if the General Revenue Fund budget is about $33 billion, is that what you said?
Correct. That's sort of considered our bank account.
Is that the money that actually comes from the Illinois taxpayers? Is that what we mean?
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part. There's some other...
There is some federal money in the General Revenue Fund, but yeah.
But there's, in addition to the $83 billion underfunding, there's some, what is it? There's also money that's owed on pensions?
Well,
obligations?
the $83 billion is the shortfall in the pension funds to be funded at the 90% level that actuarially has been set as the target.
So that's sort of the safe level. If you're 90% funded, then you can make reasonable investments, get reasonable rates of return, and the money you've promised to people will be there.
That's correct. Yeah.
If you're like, what are we now? 30%?
We're in the 40s.
We're in the 40% range. If you do that, you either have to make extraordinarily high rates of return to meet your obligations, or you have to raise taxes later, or you have to cut benefits, or you have to ask people to work longer who are currently in the system.
Yeah,
or you have to adjust COLAs, the cost of living adjustments. Pretty much that's the gamut of choices.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they have to, if I didn't say, they have to pay more, the current employees.
And I think if you look at, given where we are, you're talking about, 2.5 times our total budget. We have the worst per capita deficit on pensions of any state in the country.
We're like primo. We're number one. Numero uno. Illinois is on top. When they say Illinois is the #1 state, I don't know if that's what they mean, but they mean #1 in underfunding. But the basic thing to come out of this is that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Right. We've got a significant
We
problem.
often go back to this book here. See if we can get that. There we go.
Capitalism
Milton
and
Friedman.
Freedom.
Capitalism and Freedom. So one thing that comes out of Milton Friedman, not necessarily right in this book, is there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. I think he's said that. The acronym for that, people might remember, is TANS to fall. If you take, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, you get that acronym. So if you want to cure this problem, you can't just say, oh, there won't be any pain.
No, no, you can't, because that would be ignoring the reality of the situation.
And Senate President John Cullerton, we're taping this show on March 25th, and just 6 days ago at the City Club of Chicago, he laid out the problem as he sees it, and laid out some solutions. Okay, I think he said, in short, basically you have to ask people to work a little longer, and you have to adjust the COLAs, the cost of living adjustments, from compound to simple. Whether it's simple compounding, not compounding, it's just simple COLAs that just accrue without compounding. You understand that?
I do.
Now, let's get, you're a Republican, he's a Democrat. You're both in the Senate. He's the leader, the Senate president. You're a person who's influential. Do you agree with Senate President John Cullerton on that, or can reasonable people disagree on this?
Well, I am encouraged to hear him speak about pension reform, because if you look at the situation we have, again, having the worst funding ratio in the country, we've got a major problem. And we have a major problem in this area on two fronts. The first is those employees that are counting on this pension. I think you're lying to them if you continue down the path that we've gone down to get here, and you tell them, don't worry, your pension's fine. Because frankly, the way things are set up now, your pension's not fine.
But Senate President Cullerton is not saying that, and I hope I've characterized his statement correctly. He's not saying their pension's fine. He's saying you do have to adjust the cost of living adjustments.
Yeah, no, I think
you do have to work a little longer.
I do, yeah. He's obviously acknowledging there's a problem.
But is he saying that you also have to, you know, it's kind of like the energy problem. Barack Obama now says he's for all of the above, meaning he's for drilling. We didn't know that so much, but it turns out he says he is. He's for new energy sources, sustainable energy. He's for nuclear. He's for all of the above. Now, is it the same thing for people like you, Senate President John Cullerton and Matt Murphy, that is, you potentially could be for a whole array of solutions, or you could say you only like 2 of those 5, and you'll do only 5 of the potential things are really, only 2 of the 5 are necessary. Is that kind of the difference between you and Senate President Cullerton?
Well, you know,
you didn't hear the speech at the City Club.
I did not hear his speech at the City Club. I have heard about it.
And what's your understanding of what he said?
Well, he has thrown out some ideas, and you know, I think most of them certainly deserve some exploration. And we have a working group on pensions in Springfield right now.
Have you heard anybody sort of say what I've heard, that basically he said work a little longer in COLAs and you've got most of the problem solved?
I haven't heard it phrased quite that way. I do know those are a couple things he had commented on. I don't know that you're going to solve an $83 billion problem with just that. And
that's
I do
asking
think
those two tools to do a lot of work.
It's asking those 2 tools to do a lot of work. I do think that it is extremely important that when we take this problem on, that we really solve it. We had the treasurer of Rhode Island in, and she spoke to a group of us just a couple weeks ago. And Rhode Island, like Illinois, totally Democrat-controlled state, she pushed through a pension reform that cut their unfunded liability in half. Now, it was tough, but at the end of the day, it was meaningful, and I think you could fairly say solved their problem.
What was the rough magnitude?
Well, I mean,
we're talking a much smaller state.
You're talking about a much smaller state.
Rhode Island is like Palatine, you know.
But the political issues.
Really, it's not much bigger than Palatine.
It's
teeny.
It's maybe 1.5 congressional districts. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think the broader point was this was an extremely difficult thing to do politically because, for the same reason it is here, you're changing a promise on people in the middle of the game. And I certainly don't relish the fact that we have to do that.
And what did Rhode Island do? What were their key solutions?
Well, they made current employees work to 67,
so
really without exception.
So Senate President Cullerton's with them in that. I think.
Well, that's a lot longer. That's not a little longer.
How long do they have to work now?
Well, there are a number
55?
of employees that can be out at 55.
So 12 years. We have to ask Senate President Cullerton when he comes here, when he says a little longer, and I unfortunately wasn't at that presentation, so I'm going to have to look at that more closely and see. Maybe he says exactly, when he says a little longer, how many years he means. Doesn't sound like he means 12 years, because that's a lot longer.
That's a totally different situation.
Would you ask them? Would you ask the people, current employees in the state of Illinois, to work not until they're 55, but until they're 67?
Well, I thought the Senate Bill 512 menu of options for employees was a little bit more respectful of them, frankly, than just mandating.
How much did that ask them? That gave them choices.
That gave them choices. You could either pay what it would really cost to stay in the current system. You could agree to continue to pay what you pay now, but you're going to have to work longer to 67 and pay less, or you could go into a defined contribution with a 6% employer match.
Okay, so those are the choices. You can pay more into the system. You'll get the current benefits.
Correct. Which would probably be attractive to people who aren't too far from retirement.
Do you have to work longer?
No, you would not.
So just pay more, and you could still retire at 55 and get the current benefits.
If you're in a system that allows a retirement at 55 and you have the years and all those sorts of things.
So that would be, and if you didn't want to do that under Senate Bill 512, well, then you could go for still a defined benefit system, but what, you don't?
You would have to work till 67.
Okay.
And
it would be lower benefits.
It would be a reduced benefit.
But you wouldn't have to pay anymore.
That's correct.
Or you could go to a defined contribution system, and then you don't have to work any longer.
That's true.
And then in your current accrued benefits under the old system, you'd still get.
You would still get.
And then you supplement it with.
Yeah, nobody would lose anything that they had already earned.
And that was not, but the one thing is that Senate Bill 512, it didn't come up for a vote, did it?
No, it did not.
Because apparently the rumor is none of the legislative leaders, well, in the House, it was said that Speaker Mike Madigan didn't have the necessary votes to put on there to get it passed, nor did Tom Cross as to what they thought was appropriate for each to get. Right?
Well, you know, obviously the House Republicans are less than half of the House. They're in the minority. They had, I am told, and I believe, half of the votes necessary. So a larger percentage.
They had 30 of it, so you need 60 votes, and the House Republicans had 30 to put on there.
Even though they're not half of the House, they had half of the votes.
Speaker Mike apparently didn't have half that he needed.
That's my understanding.
Okay. And what about in the Senate? Something comparable between Redonio and Cullerton?
Well, Senate Republicans pledged last year to put half of the votes necessary. And again, we're not half of the Senate, obviously.
So you're going to put 15 votes on it?
We committed to putting 15 votes on.
And what about
on a pension reform plan that would solve the problem and would provide some budget relief. Because the other thing that I think it's important to understand in the context of pension reform, in 1995, our pension payment that the state makes out of the General Revenue Fund was 3% of our overall budget. This year it's about 20. So as it grows as a percentage of the overall budget, it necessarily crowds out other spending, K through 12 education, helping the developmentally disabled and mentally ill.
So are you building a coalition of people who benefit from government spending who may say, we like the Republicans on this a little bit more than we like the Democrats, and those people have been traditionally in the Democratic corner because now they see their spending that's going to benefit their constituencies being crowded out by the large pension payments?
I think it's really important for anybody who has a stake in state government, and frankly that's everybody here, to understand the ramifications of the choices that have been made. So absolutely, those who have a developmentally disabled family member or one who relies on the state for mental health, they already understand what's gone on. We are increasingly taking from those areas to make up for the increases in these parts of the budget. And if you look at our budget, now we had a $7 billion tax increase. In a $33 billion budget, that is a meaningful increase in revenue.
Did it go from $26 billion to $33 billion?
Yeah. Well, no. Well, the revenue did.
The revenue did as a result of the increase in the individual income tax from 3% to 5%, and the corporate increase in the income tax. So the state, as a result of that increase, it's estimated got an additional $7 billion in revenue, which some would say would balance the budget, and it almost did, except for the $7 billion or so in unpaid bills.
Right. In fact,
Outstanding
with
unpaid
$7
bills.
billion more money coming in this year, the governor right now predicts that we will run a $500 million deficit
So
within this year.
Can't quite do it. He needs.
So even after
He's coming up to people, Governor Paquin, and say, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" Because if he collects all those dimes, that'll make up for the $500 million he's short.
correct. And
So,
he hasn't done that yet, but I suspect that
Governor
might be
Paquin,
coming.
come on this show, and I think you can do this under our rules. You could ask each citizen, "Brother, can you spare a dime?"
So, I mean, but think about what that means. $7 billion more in revenue, and they're still running a deficit. And the backlog of bills is right now about $10 billion.
So it's getting worse.
You had the tax increase and it's getting worse. The bottom line is the spending continues to be out of control. And to that point that we were talking about before, the spending is really being driven primarily in the pension payment, which for fiscal year 13 is $5.1 billion, and Medicaid, which has absolutely exploded over the last decade. So those two are driving the fact that spending continues to go up, despite the fact that we had the tax increase that was supposedly going to be paired with spending cuts.
So roughly, before we go to Medicaid, and we'll do that in just a minute, and before we leave the pensions, if we adopted a bill something like Senate Bill 512, which, by the way, I guess Senate President, so you're saying Senate Republican leader Chris Rodonio had the half votes she needed to get the deal done, but Senate President Cullerton didn't have the votes on Senate Bill 512 to do it. Plus, I guess Senate President Cullerton, I think, would say, and we hope he'd come here and speak for himself, he didn't support Senate Bill 512, right?
He did not.
So now he did not have the votes. He wasn't out there trying to get them because he didn't himself think it was a good bill.
That's correct. Now, the Senate Republicans, what we pledged was half the votes necessary for a pension reform that solved the problem and provided budget relief. Okay. And we felt like...
so roughly, if you had adopted Senate Bill 512, what would that knock the pension payment down to for your annual payments in the next few years? You're saying it was $5 billion. Would it knock it down to maybe $2 billion?
No. You
would have.
No, you would have
$4
probably...
billion?
Yeah, maybe.
So it only saves you $1 billion.
Yeah. Well, only.
It's only $1 billion, but my point is you got a lot of work left to do if you're going to handle the unpaid bills and handle this slop over of, assuming there's not an increase in economic growth.
Well, and in fact, we do project about a $700 million increase in revenue.
In revenues from some continued
from
growth
12
in the economy,
to 13.
as the economy continues to recover.
The problem is the pension payment goes up by $1 billion all by itself.
So the Medicaid payment. Now, I think Governor Paquin has told Julie Amos, the director of Healthcare and Aging, Department of Healthcare and Aging.
Health and Family Services.
Health and Family Services, who was just here. She lies awake at night figuring out how is she going to cut a Medicaid budget of about $14.8 billion by $2 billion, plus there's
2.7.
2.7, plus I think she says she can't really cut away from 14.8 because there's some things you can't really even approach. So you're talking about 2.7 from something like 11. You're talking over a 20% cut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's your advice to Julie Amos? How does she do that?
Well, here's the thing. You have to understand first how you got into a problem of this magnitude. And there's a couple of ways. Because if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? I don't know if that's in one of those books, but I'm sure it's in one somewhere.
Well, I'll give you a hint, because we only got about 10 or 12 minutes left here, if I calculate it right. But this is another Milton Friedman book, Free to Choose, a personal statement by Milton and Rose Friedman. But you see the theme of this show, and I think maybe the theme of the Republican Party, maybe even in Illinois, is choice. You can mandate things. If you have a problem, see, that's the Democratic approach. If they're spending more than they can continue to spend, even the Democrats and Governor Paquin recognize this. So Medicaid, they can't continue to spend at $14.8 billion. You can't have that budget. Maybe it'll be 11 or 12 billion. You got to cut a few $1 billion. So their approach, I think, what she said, is that they're going to have to have some utilization controls. In other words, she said there are like 200,000 people or some large number like that who are getting 5 or more drugs. So you know what? It's not a matter of whether we say you can get by. You're just not going to get all those drugs. Some doctor, not your doctor, is going to decide, well, these drugs are not effective, or we've got something else that's just as effective that costs less, or you don't need as many drugs. That's not a choice approach. That's not a free market approach. The alternative, and tell me if your folks are thinking about this, the alternative is to try to give more discretion to individuals. Give them a choice how to allocate their own budget. Let them choose which drugs are most important, working with their doctor. Maybe let them choose to have a health insurance system, and what you're doing is paying for that health insurance system, like as in the reforms that are being proposed on the federal level with Medicare. So more premium subsidies as opposed to fee-for-service.
Yeah, I mean,
am I right? Or,
well, conceptually,
that's the choice, because the other approach here is Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father, a story of race and inheritance. And Barack said this when he was sitting right in that chair on July 18th, 2004, and he hadn't had a health plan yet. And I said, look, the Republicans want more choice. People can find this if you go to youtube.com, public affairs / public affairs TV, and you look at the Berkowitz reel, you know, the Democrat, my little promo. You'll actually see a clip of that show, and this is interesting, July 18, 2004, State Senator then, Barack Obama. I said, look, the Republicans, I'm not saying this in a denigrating way, you want more control. You want to have the government more involved in making these decisions. The Republicans want to have more of the individual making these decisions. And I said, isn't that the case? And you know what Barack said? He said, Jeff, show me the plan. He said, you Republicans don't have a plan. He had a plan. He became president, and we have that, Obamacare. And we're taping this on the 25th of March. In the next few days, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to decide whether that plan is constitutional, or at least start deciding as they hear oral argument.
Right.
What's the Republican response to all that?
Well, I mean, I think
on the Illinois level, you, Matt Murphy, Chris Redonio, Tom Cross, the leaders, the House and Senate, do you have a unified approach to dealing with Medicaid, and what is it?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do, and part of what the problem has been with Medicaid, is that we went from 1.5 million people on Medicaid 10 years ago to almost 3 million today. So that's a doubling in a decade. Half of the births in Illinois last year were paid for by Medicaid. I can't think of a more damning indictment of one-party rule than the fact that half of the people in this state.
They're needy. They need
what does it
that help.
say about the leadership, though, over the last decade, if half of the people giving birth in your state are needy?
But you're saying, they say healthcare, everybody knows healthcare costs have increased enormously. It's hard to get healthcare insurance. You have all of these problems.
We had a national expert.
They're going to say, you guys just don't care. This is why the Republican Party is in trouble, they would say, in Illinois.
Well, certainly.
Is the Republican Party in trouble?
Well,
this is why
I think the Republican Party has an opportunity.
But the Democrats have the majority of the House. Democrats have the majority in the Senate. The Democrats have essentially the majority in the Illinois Supreme Court, and they have the majority as the governorship. Aren't the people telling you, this is what they want? I mean, look, free to choose. If the people in Illinois want this democratic approach, so be it. I mean, they've now had 10 years to deal with this, with the majority in the Senate and the State House and the governor, and and resoundingly, Pat Quinn was reelected. I mean, he wasn't.
I don't know if I'd call it resounding, but he was reelected. He was reelected,
and he wasn't even elected in the first place, so he was elected because he came in there differently. But the point is, they have spoken, and are you coming to them and you're giving them? Are you and Chris Redonio and Tom Cross and the other Republicans? Are you given a clear choice, a choice, not an echo, so to speak, to what the Democratic Party is offering? So where are you complaining?
More broadly,
what's the big choice you're giving them?
Well, more broadly, I mean, you've got to look at, you have tax increases and resulting job loss. No state saw unemployment spike higher than Illinois in the years since the Democrats passed the tax increase. Democrat tax increase, Republicans for lower taxes where job creation can occur.
That's
3 weeks later.
It's a choice. Excuse me.
That's
you want to repeal that income tax increase
correct.
from 5% to 3%. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you're telling them that's not going to push up the deficit and make all sorts of more problems. You'll have growth and it'll work out. You're
going to have to remake Illinois government in a form that is actually affordable to taxpayers.
You have to spend less.
You've got to spend less money.
Secondly, reform, not just cut, but the point is, don't just go around randomly cutting things. Figure out a way to reform the Medicaid system to make it more efficient, so maybe the quality of care doesn't go down, but the cost goes down. Am I getting that right?
That is certainly part of the equation in the context of Medicaid. But keep in mind, it was the governor who started out the year saying we need to cut $2.7 billion from Medicaid. So this isn't some slash and burn Republican saying this. What he's finally coming to.
What are you saying? Are you saying don't cut $2.7 billion?
No,
or do it?
No.
Are you saying do it in a different way?
No, I think you do have to do it.
Are you going to support whatever he says to do it that way?
No, I think we have to have a thoughtful approach. I think you have to try. Here's the reality of the situation. They have presided over a doubling of Medicaid. It is a systematic, planned expansion of Medicaid to the point where they have broken the system.
Okay, so you're saying it's the eligibility. You've got to get a lot of people who are currently eligible for Medicaid off it. These folks can afford it. There are other ways for them to handle these problems without having the Illinois state government.
Let me give you a couple.
Am I right on that? That's the big thing. Eligibility.
That's a huge component of this.
You got to shrink the participants in the Medicaid program, so the people who are truly needy aren't cut.
Correct.
But the people who are cut are people who really could find private alternatives and pay for it themselves.
Am I right? Is that what you're saying? That's absolutely right. The Civic Federation did a study. 5 years out, without changes in Medicaid, you will have a $21 billion backlog of just Medicaid bills. Now, that's 2/3 of our current entire budget. Well, what happens in a payment backlog like that? Who's being delayed money? Doctors and hospitals. Doctors and hospitals aren't going to treat the needy on Medicaid in this social safety net program if they're going to have to wait an entire year to get paid.
So they don't have access now.
You will effectively kill Medicaid unless you reform it right now.
So right now, people who are on Medicaid are facing doctors who say, we don't want to deal with it, and they don't have to.
And it's only going to
just like Medicare on the federal level. They can say, look, we don't want to deal with you folks, and they have the right to do that, right?
That's absolutely correct.
And so technically, the people who are on Medicaid say, okay, we've got the politicians go to them and says, oh, you great program for Medicaid, you've got access to health care. But they don't.
Theoretically,
but practically they go to the doctor and he says, go somewhere else.
Yep.
And they have to go somewhere else and have to wait 6 months to get something done, or they get it done by somebody who's inferior, so they don't have it.
Right.
So that's your selling point now, politically, is to persuade people, one, that's the right way, so you can get the policy adopted and you can get enough, or persuade Democrats that they're wrong and to join with you in a different policy.
Well, and look, as I said, we had a national expert come in and speak to the entire Senate this week. She acknowledged there is not another state in the country that is in as bad a position with having to cut as big a percentage as Illinois does. She also acknowledged there is not another state in the country that saw their growth on Medicaid primarily occurring before the recession, like it did in Illinois. Most people say, well, there's so many people on Medicaid because this recession is throwing them onto the rolls.
So
that's not the experience in Illinois. The Democrats who have been running the state poured people into Medicaid before the recession started.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, State Senator Matt Murphy. A lot of people are saying, this guy sitting on my right, and maybe not to my philosophical right, maybe, but they're saying Matt Murphy's going to be governor in 2014. Are they right, Matt?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I got a job to do right now in the Senate, and we're trying to offer some alternatives that can get this state turned around, and so we'll let 2014 play out.
The big ticket items on reform we've covered: pensions, Medicaid, but there's also education. A lot of people say you still have many failing schools in the Chicago public schools. A lot of people say 200,000 out of 360,000 are not getting educated properly, or not learning how to read, write, not going on to college in any significant proportions. So aside from the cost being too high, quality too low, is there a magic bullet here, a silver bullet to reform education in Chicago and elsewhere where we have failing schools?
I have supported the pilot voucher bill for Chicago schools. I think competition.
Which Reverend Meeks, State Senator Reverend Meeks,